So let's get into it. So I think where we last left off was you should have your setup now, your music making equipment. You should have the computer, the program that you're working with. We talked about getting familiar with the program. So I think now you're at this point where, okay, you got to start and you got to create your first project, or just a project in general. So I think what I'm going to do is lay out not the step-by-step process, but more, the process of the making an actual song or product. So it's tough because it'll start with whichever instrument you're using. If you're like a guitarist, you'll probably have a couple of chords that you fell in love with. Or if you're a vocalist, you have some lyrics. You probably need an instrument to kind of put everything together. Piano, same thing. You have a couple of chords that you like, or you have a one lick, but you have an idea. It can be the roughest of the rough. Now, depending on your style, if you are not instrumental, play an instrument, and you're just one of these computer guys, you're probably gonna make your idea on the DAW. You'll probably get inspired within the DAW. If you play an instrument, you'll probably come up with the entire song with the instrument in your hand and then record it, which is totally fine. Also, you can record that idea you have on your instrument and kind of build on this process. But the first thing is you have the idea, you have the concept, and then you're going to go ahead and start recording and constructing this idea that you have. Now, most of the time, and this is with my experience, sometimes I'll have a plan on what I'm doing, and then I'll just start working on something, and it'll completely change into something else. And that something else is probably really good. Most of the time, it starts out something, with one concept, and I just grow into something completely different. So you have your idea, you have your four chords, or you have your bass line. You're going to want to, or you have your DAW. So you're going to go in and lay this down, record this either in like a loop, which is what most people do, and listen it back and forth over and over again. Or you're trying it with MIDI. You have these chords and you're applying different sounds to it, or you already have a sound, but you have the idea. I think aside from that, I'm just trying to get focused. There was a little. But when you have everything laid out in front of you, so let's say I have, these four chords. Bum, bum, bum. Bum, bum, bum. Bum, 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 bum. And that'll be the idea. That'll be our example, right? So I'll go ahead and I'll take that idea, that concept, and I'll record it in there. I'll record it. I'll probably find the metronome, the tempo, how fast I want this track to be. So, we'll say 120. Bum, 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 bum. And then once you have that kind of in the computer, you can also start by not just, let's say you're not even inspired or capable of just kind of getting the sound. Maybe there's a stock loop, or for like my hip hop guys, there's a sample on a record that you just want to get in there. So I think the first concept is conceptualizing the idea somehow, and then just putting this rough shot idea on the DAW. All right. So, and a lot of people will put like different titles on the process too. And it's tough because this is just conceptualizing, in my opinion. I wouldn't necessarily call this mixing yet. Not even, you can call this recording. More so you're sound designing, you're conceptualizing, orchestrating in one way or another, but you're just getting this rough idea down. So let's say you've gone through, you've got your first original idea. You're going to want to start accompanying this idea and the way to grow with your first idea, we'll go back to this, like, that chord sample. I probably just, a lot of people start with like that melody, that loop, which is really great. You get, or the like that vocal line, and you try to build some other things around it. You can also start with the drums too, just so you don't have to use the metronome the entire time. You can lay down a simple 1-2, and that might breathe something in the air. And especially if you're like one of those loop guys that likes using different stock loops or samples, maybe just get your sample in there and then throw the drums, or even have just the drums playing and then seeing which drums work with the sample. You can start either way, but having the time and making sure that everything can exist in the proper time is good. And that goes back to the sample wise too. You can't necessarily stretch the sample too fast or too slow. It's got to kind of exist. So when I say sampling, I mean taking some other art form, and you're taking a piece of that and you're chopping it up, or you're just applying it into your DAW, into your workstation, and you're manipulating it in a way that you can reuse it. So it's like almost like a blood sample. You draw it from this track, and then you give it to another person. Stuff like that. Same kind of concepts. So that's my hyperbole analogy explanation on sampling. But when you sample, and this is my best advice, you're gonna wanna. It'll come to you. Your subconscious or whatever, your mind will apply the drums in the background of, like, while you're listening to the sample. So sometimes I'll hear like a nice vocal or a cappella, and I'm like, oh, this would go really great with just a boom bap over it, or just and maybe I just heard some like slow piano chord somewhere, and then I can hear that in my head, like, oh, this will mix together. I've already kind of established that idea. You can also try and apply, but that's if you just listening to your gut, and if you can feel that inspiration from the sample is going to work out for your best, rather than just like getting a bunch of samples and trying to see what works together. And that's just an advice on just workflow with sampling. But let's say let's go back to the whole thing. You have your project. You have your project, or your idea, more or less. Give me 1 second, I'm gonna grab some water.